Yes, aye.
Thank you. Brenda Salvati did not weigh in a moment ago. Is she here?
Brenda Salvati, I thought that she sent the message to the entire committee. She is no longer part of the committee. I believe, if I recall correctly, she retired.
Ah, okay, my mistake. Okay, I think it's everybody. So unanimously passed.
Chairperson, this is Bill. I vote yes.
Oh, okay. Bill was there. All right. So unanimous with everybody, including Bill Persinger's. But where we left off was the discussion of the subcommittees: diversion, specialty courts, specialty prisons. The discussion thus far has been an update from diversion. We need a new chair of the diversion working group of this subcommittee. Spence was giving us a update on that. Shelley Williams did as well. The specialty courts. Judge Brown just updated that he and the Chief Justice of the Kansas Supreme Court are going to discuss this, and they'll have an update for the commission by the fall. And I think that's where we left off when we got shut down because of the problem with the connection. So, Spence, I'll turn it back to you. Supervision Subcommittee, Specialty Prisons is kind of the last part of that working or of that subcommittee, if you would, please.
Right. Thank you. This is Spence Cohen again. So on specialty prisons, I'm going to ask Secretary Zamuda to go ahead and give an update. He provided one to our group as well. So.
Thank you, Spence. This is Jeff Zamuda, Corrections Secretary. Our specialty prisons group proposed two projects for specialty prisons. They were to renovate existing buildings to create specialized housing for our populations. Those were submitted into the Department of Corrections budget last year, and I believe, although I've not been able to confirm it 100% yet, but I believe both remain in the KDOC budget for this year, and there's a little carryover from this year into next year. I'll briefly go over the projects. One is a project adjacent to our Winfield facility. There's a couple of buildings adjacent there, and we propose approximately 240 beds there. About 140 of those beds would be established for our geriatric population, and those would serve the population, the older population with the most chronic care conditions and or cognitive health issues. And then we would have about approximately 100 beds that would be for drug and alcohol treatment for some general population offenders. Second project is adjacent to our Lansing Correctional Facility, and this would be renovation of a building in the former East Unit at Lansing, and that unit is now unoccupied due to the opening of the reconstructed facility at Lansing. Refurbishing of a building, a couple buildings there, support buildings and a housing unit would establish approximately 200 beds to house a population that is in need of drug and alcohol treatment. So that'd be a total of approximately 240 beds between the two projects. Assuming that the funding is still there and will be ongoing into the next budget cycle, we would begin design here very shortly and engineering so we could be prepared and get moving on those two projects with potential completion or opening within as little as 24 months. And I think that is the extent of what our committee had worked on and had recommended. I stand for questions, Mr. Chair.
I appreciate it. That's you've given us that kind of quick update in April, but obviously with the remaining few days of the session, it wasn't clear whether that would stand or would be amended, but it sounds like that remained in the budget, best we know. So that's good news. Anyone else have any comments, questions, anything else want to ask Secretary Zamuda? Okay, very good. Spence, we'll go back. Supervision Subcommittee, it was the last in your.
Right, Spence Cohen again. I'm going to ask Shelley Williams to report on the supervision work group.
Shelley?
Thank you. Since our last meeting as a commission, we have met on at least 2 occasions, and we did expand the supervision subcommittee to include 6 additional people. And just really quick, I will go over those. Matt Hadaya, he's from the 11th Judicial District Community Corrections in Crawford County and is an adult intensive supervision officer. Audrey Kress, she is the Director of Victim Services for the Department of Corrections. Hope Cooper as the parole representative for the Department of Corrections. Erin Geist is standing in for Judge Brown, who you heard speak earlier and is chairing the Specialty Courts Committee. And she is an intensive supervision officer too, or a supervisor in Northwest Kansas Community Corrections, and they also oversee parole services. Bryan Sadler is the Senior Business Intelligence Analyst for Johnson County Department of Corrections, and he is currently serving as our data expert. And Spence Cohen, the Court Services Specialist for OJA, and Sheriff Carr recently joined us earlier this morning on our subcommittee membership. We are in the process of doing an in-depth data collection regarding substance abuse, mental health, housing, and employment service as it pertains to individuals on supervision. And the ultimate goal of the data collection is to map the services and see where the gaps are within the different communities and across the state in those services that are key to risk reduction and recidivism in Kansas. And so over the next month and a half to 2 months, we will be collecting those data elements. It'll be from community corrections agencies, court services, and parole. And we will work with the Council of State Government, continue to work with them to map those services and see what recommendations might come out of this committee, especially as it pertains to any gaps in services. We also will be looking at a recently published report that the Pew Trust put out, and it is Policy Reforms Can Strengthen Community Supervision. And so we will be looking at some of those that other states have engaged in and see what works for our state and making recommendations for that. So with that, I would stand for questions, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, very good. Any questions for Shelley? Seeing none. All right. Spence, anything else from your subcommittee then?
No other information to report at this time. We plan to meet again 1 or 2 weeks before the next full commission meeting. So we'll get that out once we determine what that date will be. And that's it, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. All right, Mental Health Substance Abuse Committee. Representative Owens, memory serves, you're in that.
That's it. Well, thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Pull back up here. We had the opportunity to meet back on April 13th. That was actually prior to our previous meeting. We haven't had the opportunity to meet since then. You guys might be aware of just how crazy the legislature's been, and things have been a little bit crazy. So haven't had a chance to meet again, but did want to update on a number of other things and some directional items. First of all, as I mentioned, Brenda Salvati mentioned, let us know that she was no longer at her current employment and would no longer be part of the subcommittee or this committee. So it would be great to find a replacement for her. I also would like to open it up. That leaves our subcommittee with only, 1, 2, 3 other committee members other than myself, and then Scott Schultz, who's ex officio. So we would certainly love to have some additional support. And in lieu of anybody that may want to join from the current commission, which of course we're more than happy to, we too would like permission to reach outside of our current committee to be able to recruit some additional ex officio members to join our Mental Health and Substance Abuse Subcommittee.
I think that'd be a great idea. Again, mental health is chief among the topics that come up whenever criminal justice reform is mentioned. So it's important. I'd also ask that some attention be paid, or do what we can to make sure we get representation from various parts of the state, various big jurisdictions as well as more rural areas, because the issues let's put it this way, this issue affects different parts of the state differently. So Sheriff, did I see you trying to get my attention?
Yes, sir. Representative Owens, if you would reach out to me, I might have some suggestions of some possible folks here in the western part, maybe Garden, Dodge, or even Liberal, even Scott City possibly. This is something that I'm on.
Be happy to.
So I think I might be able to get some more people involved to help you out.
Okay, yeah, I would be more than happy to, Sheriff Carr. Thank you very much for that. I did want to continue on and update. So as we have talked about, or we'll talk about, obviously we had a lot of legislation that didn't get passed this session due to the coronavirus pandemic and the closure of the legislature early. Myself and Representative Jennings, even at the special session, attempted to reintroduce legislation, because with it being a special session, everything starts anew. So we tried to introduce legislation, or we did introduce legislation that would have extended the subcommittee, or that would have extended the commission, and then done a few other things, including the key piece of legislation for our subcommittee, which was the substance abuse treatment program for diverted defendants. But unfortunately, leadership decided that there would be no other bills heard during that period. So fortunately, those were introduced, then they promptly died within about 48 hours as well. But we still gave it a go. I do have some positive news on that front. One of the recommendations that we had as a subcommittee to the legislature was requesting a comprehensive audit of all of the work groups and all of the different committees and commissions that have been meeting regarding substance abuse, mental health. There's some on county levels, state level, there's the governors, there's so many different groups. I haven't received 100% official word, but the Legislative Post-Audit Selection Committee has selected our audit. They are wanting to make a few changes to the proposal just to ensure that we have additional scope. But it does appear that Legislative Post-Audit is going to take up exactly what we're asking them to do as a subcommittee, and that is to research with not only CMHCs, substance abuse providers, in and out of the Department of Corrections, and various other stakeholders to determine not only what they're doing, what works, what they think is best, and also any recommendations that they would have that could bring back to us. So I think that will be very, very beneficial. It will be a 3 to 5 month process, if I remember correctly, for them to conclude their work. But when they conclude their work, it appears that they will be able to provide us with some very valuable information that will do an awful lot of work that we are unable to do. They'll be our feet on the ground. So hopefully that will be finalized and approved in the very near future, but it appears that it's headed in the right direction. So I was grateful for that.
Okay, it's good to hear.
Let's see. And finally, one thing I thought I'd share, I believe it was mentioned earlier as far as sheriff in Dodge City, but I also was reelected, I suppose by acclamation or lack of opposition would be the right word. So I will continue in my current capacity as a state representative for 2 years, short of some amazing write-in campaign that I hopefully don't foresee happening. So I look forward to continuing to continue this work, and really excited that I'll be able to take much of the legislation that we introduced last year and make sure that it is pre-filed this coming year, and hopefully be able to usher it through the process with a bit more expediency and a whole lot more success. So that's what I have at this very point in time.
Okay, very good. I appreciate the information. The post audit is good news. Obviously, 3 to 5 months is great, but at the same time, if it's 5 months, that puts us in November. So we'll have to, it'd be a quick turnaround for us to get a December report to the legislature. But if nothing else as an addendum, it would at least give members of the legislature the information. We'll see if we'll have it in time to make recommendations based on it, but it's good to have.
Yep.
As far as the being unopposed, you and I are both in the enviable position of having jobs no one else wants. So same degree of opposition. Everybody around here went, good luck.
That's right. Exactly. Thank you. Keep going.
Chairman?
Okay. Yes.
Bill Persinger again. I'm sorry, I am having mute button issues today. Normally I handle technology pretty well. Can you hear me?
We can.
So I just would second Sheriff Carr's offer of maybe finding Subcommittee Chairperson Owens additional team members for the Mental Health Subcommittee. And Representative Owens, if you're listening, just sent you an email. I'd be glad to help out. I think somebody from Sheriff Carr's area would be great, somebody from Western Kansas, and could probably also give you a few names of maybe some mental health or substance abuse folks who maybe work in the more rural or other regions. So I could be glad to help out.
Very good. Thank you very much, Bill. I appreciate that.
Pleasure.
Okay.
Sheriff Carr.
Yeah, go ahead.
Hey, do you know Rick Dalkey?
I know Rick very well. He's just a neighboring county.
Yeah, for sure. I've known Rick since '78. You tell him anybody but him would be fine.
You would expect that from us.
Yeah, he would. Thanks.
I've actually just sent an email out to some individuals out here, so we'll see what comes of it.
Good. Super. Be glad to help. Thanks.
Okay, if there's no further discussion, we'll jump down to the next subcommittee. It'd be proportionality sentencing. Chief Ackerman.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Chief Ackerman, Marysville Police Department of Marysville. We have not met since the last meeting. We were waiting for the legislature and they closed out. We didn't fare very well this year, obviously, with a lot of stuff died on the floor, you that are in committee. And we actually have our first meeting since then scheduled for tomorrow at 10 a.m. And we're going to discuss the things that were dropped, try to work with the Sentence Commission to see what they're going to want to help recommend. With today's time and what's going on right now, I don't know what is going to be handed to the legislature starting when they reopen again. So anyway, we'll have the answers hopefully here by the next meeting. Whenever it is we schedule it, we'll have a lot more by tomorrow now. But we didn't get much accomplished in the legislature this year at all. And it wasn't their fault either. Their time was limited. So.
Yep. Okay. All right. Any questions or?
Yeah, I just would add, Chief Ackerman, you're 100% right, because we were really making some great headway on a lot of items throughout our corrections committee specifically. I'll tell you, we took up more bills and passed down more bills, I think, than any other committee did during the session. And so the effort was certainly there. The time certainly wasn't, but definitely look forward to hearing more and working on that this next legislative session as well.
As Chief Ackerman, I think we can, if we can come to an agreement on maybe a more limited number, might be easier, just in case the old COVID does come back around again next year again. So hopefully we can do more. We can do better next time.
Okay. Let's see here. Data management was Jennifer Basinger. I don't think she's on the call, but I know last several meetings, the gist of her statement's been they've asked for the post audit to take a look at what data management systems, RMSs, are around the state. And I don't know if that made it past the threshold call for the post audit folks or not, but if she were here, I'm sure that's what she would reference, because it's tough for that subcommittee to talk about what needs to happen without knowing exactly what RMS records management systems are being utilized by various law enforcement agencies, corrections, all the different entities that touch the criminal justice system. So Reentry, I believe.
Mr. Chairman,
Yeah, go ahead.
sorry, if I may, Mr. Chairman, Stephen Owen, 74th House District. I reached out to Legislative Post Audit and asked both of those questions because I submitted under my name both of those recommendations to the Legislative Post Audit. And the Legislative Post Audit, Mr. Chris Clark, who is the Deputy Post Auditor, did inform me that the proposal on data systems within the criminal justice agencies was not selected as one of their post audits. So unfortunately, the subcommittee will have to decide kind of where they go from there.
Yep, I'll let Jennifer know, and then they can make a decision where they go from there. So, okay, reentry subcommittee. Let's see here. If memory serves, Representative Finney was chair of that, and then I think Professor Phillips was vice chair, and I want to say Professor Phillips has taken over that. Is that
Yep.
I remembering that right?
Yeah, that's correct, Mr. Chairman. So this is Jean Phillips. I did take over chairing the reentry committee. So we have not met formally as a whole committee since April. But I just want to quickly share some updates because some work, even though the whole committee didn't meet, work has been done. First of all, the two House bills that we had pending on driver's license, one was to change the requirements for the payment for restricted fees and the suspension, how long you had KDOR suspension when you had your license suspended. That bill went down. Obviously, nothing moved forward. And then the other bill to change whether or not you had your license suspended in the first place for failing to pay fines also died in committee. So those things were still are on our goal list because we think those are important to move forward. I have talked with Margie Phelps at DOC, and the driver's license issue is a big one for most of the people who are leaving DOC. So we are not going to, we want to revisit that and see what we can do with that moving forward. There are a couple of other issues that we had sort of set as goals for ourselves. One of those was to deal with the collateral consequences of being able to find employment when you have a felony conviction. After speaking with some folks about that, I have obtained through, again, Margie Phelps, they have an ongoing list of statutes that they see are particularly being used or could be tweaked, licensing statutes that are prohibiting people from getting jobs. She has sent me an updated list of that. So that is a starting point for our committee going forward, is to go through that list of statutes and to see if there's anything else that we can do with that. We also are aware that sometimes housing is an issue, a collateral consequence. You can't get housing if you've got particular kinds of felony convictions. And so we're going to take a look at those statutes as well. We are continuing to look into the debt collection issue. I reported last time that it's our understanding from many of our committee members that different counties can contract with different vendors, and sometimes when you get turned over to collections for failing to pay a fee, you can be charged as much as 45% is tacked on to pay for the debt collection. And so when talking with Margie Phelps, she frequently sees people who start out with, you know, maybe $100 or $200 fine, who leave the DOC having to pay $1,000 by the time all kinds of interest and collections get added. And so we're going to take a look at those statutes to see what we can do, especially since those debts tend to impact a person's ability to get their driver's license back. So we're still looking at those issues. And I think the last thing that we had on our list of issues that we were continuing to look at was the early release of drug offenders, and not a lot of headway has been made on that. But we are ready to meet next week, and with that information that we have gathered and from a conversation I'm hoping to have with Council of State Governments with Mr. Armstrong later this week, we should be ready to move forward with our meeting next week to try and get some of these goals accomplished.
Okay. Any comments, discussion?
Sheriff Carr.
Sure.
Professor Phillips, would it be possible to get a copy of this, just, I guess, a list of the statutes that pertain to those fees? I dealt in the civil the process world for 20 years here, and I'm curious as to where they're adding all these fees up. I guess I wasn't aware of the fees that are being added on, whether they're traffic or criminal cases or what. I know a lot of those get tacked on in the civil world. So I'm curious to see where the systems work down there.
Sure. Sure, Sheriff, this is Jean Phillips again. Sure, Sheriff Carr, as we gather all of those and get our list compiled, I'm happy to share that with you.
I appreciate it. Thank you very much.
It sounds like several goals in terms of prospective legislative fixes next year. Some of the same ones from last year that just didn't get off the ground. And
Yes.
then additional to the collateral consequences for employment and housing statutes that affect that, and the debt collection as well. One of the things that I think I would expect legislators might want to hear from our commission as a whole with respect to reentry. I don't know to the extent that your subcommittee's working on this directly, but what sort of reentry programs have been successful? Not that they have piles of cash laying around, but to the extent that they want to fund or offer grant funding for successful reentry programs. If there's any recommendations in that regard, what such programs should look like, how it should be run, what entities have shown success in that regard, that might be a topic to at least include in our December report. If you've got any thoughts, if your subcommittee has any thoughts on that subject.
Yeah. So this is Jean Phillips again, Chairman Bennett. I have talked with Department of Corrections a little bit about those issues and about what they see in terms of halfway houses compared to their master leases, the amount of money that costs in order for individuals to find housing. We've also talked a little bit about going back to the collateral consequences, about what the Department of Corrections sees in terms of employment hurdles for individuals. And so we're going to try to figure out what kinds of reentry programs work, which brings me sort of like to the last thing I should have mentioned. And that is that we would like to, relying on Shelley Williams, who is doing a lot of the supervision stuff, is to try and coordinate with folks to figure out what reentry programs are working. And we also talked about coordinating with Representative Owens and the substance abuse programs, because that really plays into the ability of individuals to be successful upon reentry. And perhaps there's a way for us to coordinate with that subcommittee so that we're not replicating or duplicating the work, to be able to come up with programs that allow individuals to be successful.
Okay, very good. Okay. Any further discussion from any of the subcommittees, working groups within any of the subcommittees that need to be brought to the attention of the commission as a whole? All right. Well, we are, despite the technical difficulties, we're still ahead of schedule by, I don't know, 10, 15 minutes. So let's use this time and we'll see where it takes. We may wrap up, but so two topics I wanted to raise. The next discussion for goals for the December 2020 final report to the legislature. Pardon me. I think everyone in the subcommittees has identified already what your goals are, at least in broad strokes. Different groups will obviously spend the next several months fine tuning that. But so the first order of business, though, is I believe we've got LCC approval for one more meeting within the fiscal year, which would end in this month. So we could try to squeeze one more meeting in the month of June, and just let the cat out of the bag. I would recommend we do this instead, and that is I'll send another letter to the LCC asking for approval for additional meetings, because even if we did one in June, at this point, we're not approved for any more meetings moving forward. And I don't think the work of this commission will be done or can be done simply by everybody submitting their final thoughts in a report and asking Jordan and others to Natalie and others to try to cobble it together into some sort of a report. I think we're going to need to continue to meet. So I'm going to ask LCC for permission for more meetings. And unless someone wants to meet again this month, I mean, it's already the 8th. I'm not opposed to it, but my thought is to stick to the once a month routine, and I'll ask LCC for more approval for more meetings. Anyone though disagree or have something else to add to that conversation?
Mr. Chairman, Sheriff Carr, I agree wholeheartedly. There's no way we can finalize a report given all the subcommittees that are starting to branch it. From what I gather today, if anything, we're exploding into more areas of concern that should and need to be addressed. So I would agree that we definitely need more time.
Any other thoughts?
Chairman Bennett, this is Jean Phillips. Maybe you're going to go to this topic in a minute, but not only do I think we need more meetings, I think we need to seek an extension for another year. We have a lot of legislative issues we would like to see, and we're not going to get to see those through with what COVID did to the legislature this year.
Yeah, you read my mind. That's next on the topic. I was just chipping away here one at a time. So it sounds like everybody's in agreement with respect to the additional meetings throughout the balance of this calendar year. So I'll ask LCC for that. We're not going to get a new date set just yet since we don't have actual permission for another meeting in July, but the goal is let's do this again in July, and probably we'll try to stay to the same schedule, assuming I can get the letter written and I can get a response from LCC approving the same. But with all of that, well, actually, Jordan did make a point earlier. He said we could pick the date and then have it be tentatively approved pending LCC approval. So let's see here. I need to get out my calendar, but let's see, that would be the second Monday would be the 13th of July. Get everybody past the 4th of July, whatever the 4th of July is going to look like this year with social distancing. But would the 13th work for everybody's schedule? I think we're sticking to the same basic schedule that way. Judge Brown, memory serves you had something, but I think we've accommodated it by making it the second Monday of each month. Is that still accurate?
Yes, I'd be available on the 13th.
Very good. Okay, well, anyone have a conflict on the 13th of July?
Chairperson Bennett, this is Sylvia Penner. I do have a conflict that day.
Okay. Anyone else? Well, I hate to leave Sylvia out, but when we start moving things around, then more people start dropping off. So we'll stick to the second Monday of the month at this point, tentatively, assuming it's approved. And then if so, Jordan will send out the final confirmation for that day once it's approved. If not, well, we'll pivot and see where that takes us. Which leads us then to the next topic, which is an extension of the commission. I've heard from several of you. Sheriff Carr alluded to it earlier. Professor Phillips alluded to it just moments ago. I think that the idea of a 2-year run for the commission on the criminal justice reform in its beginning was fairly optimistic. But with the impact that COVID has had on us and shutting down the legislature, et cetera, it's really going to make it difficult. And so I think it's appropriate for us to ask for at least a 1-year extension for the work of this commission. Now, those of you on the commission, if you didn't sign up for a 3-year commitment, and if that's not going to work for you, I understand. And I just ask that you talk to the associations that sent you and make sure that maybe they've got somebody to replace you if you're not going to be able to stay on that long. But I think most of us are committed to seeing this thing through. And I agree with what Professor Phillips said. There's just too many irons in the fire here. And we were hoping to at least had some percentage of our proposed bills either passed or not, so we'd know what boxes we could check off, and that was just really taken away from us and frankly from the legislature as well. They just didn't get a chance to finish what they started. I mean, the diversion bill, for instance, passed the House 125 to nothing. I mean, it was scheduled, I think, or anticipated to have pretty smooth sailing in the Senate. Would probably be law by now or within the month if COVID hadn't hit. So there's room to be optimistic, but there's still a lot of work to do. So, Sheriff Carr.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I pose a question to the senators and representatives on the committee. Curious as to what their thoughts are on how things have proceeding through the Capitol.
Mr. Chair? Mr. Chair?
Go ahead.
Mr. Chair?
Can you hear me?
I don't know. This is David Haley.
Yes, sir. Senator, go ahead.
Yes, sir. Okay. I didn't know if you can hear. In response to the question, as was just mentioned, certainly by Representative Owens and reflected in your comments, the diversion bill was moving swiftly through the process. And I don't think there was any opposition, not speaking for Chair Wilburn, who's also a member of our commission here. I do believe that what we identified, several measures that had been identified and was going through the process as the low-hanging fruit for the terminology that we had, would have moved through, especially now with the ongoing cause to do something differently because of our, well, among other things, bed space impact for certain recidivists and certain other measures that seem to be clogging our beds. I know the Secretary didn't speak too much, Secretary Zamuda didn't speak too much on that. Diversion was going to, I think, sail through the Senate. I know Chair Wilburn will be back next year. I know he's expressed the interest. He has no opposition, as Representative Owens doesn't, in this election, and he could probably be chairing Senate Judiciary. I've got opposition in November, so if I return, I certainly would be certainly wanting to return to the third year that has been referenced, depending on what the LCC will do to extend. The other was the possession, low-level possession for certain drug crimes. I don't know, actually, Sheriff Carr, where that would have been or how that would have fared, because we never got an up or down hearing on the low-level possession crimes. That was also part of the low-hanging fruit that we had identified for in our first year of deliberation on this commission.
Okay, thanks for the update. Well, it sounds like everybody's in agreement, or if you're not, you kept it to yourself, but we all agree we need more meetings. We all agree that the commission should at least ask for an extension of its charge, at least through the 2021 session, and we'll go from there. One final thought I wanted to raise before we wrap things up then is it strikes me that we're talking about criminal justice reform right now in this time in America. It would be a little tenured of us not to at least acknowledge and address the situation ongoing now with protests regarding the killing of Mr. Floyd in Minneapolis and the fallout from that, which also I think speaks to why this commission should be extended. It does seem just tone deaf entirely for the state of Kansas to shut down its criminal justice reform commission in this day and age during this period of time. Well, we're already up, we're already doing this important work, and all of us ready to continue to move forward. To that end, so I wanted to acknowledge that reality, and I'll also point out that I think there's many things that are ongoing right now, especially some of the things Professor Phillips just ran through, arising out of her conversations with KDOC and Ms. Phelps. If some of those bills could have been passed or could get passed in the next session, I think it would lessen the burden on individuals coming out of custody and make their reentry into society exponentially smoother, removing some of the collateral consequences to employment. A lot of the types of jobs those folks are going to be searching for, the very types of jobs that they'd be prevented from getting by some of these collateral consequences. So whatever their motivation may have been initially in being passed into law, I think that whatever benefit someone thought that they might derive has far been outpaced by the detriment to society by keeping people from gainful employment. So that's just one example of what this commission is capable of identifying and bringing to the fore, and why I think it's important we continue to do our work. So against that backdrop, I'll get back to what Professor Francis reached out to me Friday evening and suggested, and I was already planning on saying what I've said so far, and so I'll give credit where it's due. His suggestion is that we consider adding a subcommittee on the issue of let's call it racial justice, racial impact of the criminal justice system, and having I guess it would be sixth subcommittee specifically on that subject. I think that multiple ad hoc members would have to be added for it to do effective work. And I'll just say off the bat, I support that. I think it's, we're at a unique crossroads right now in America between COVID and what it's done to the court system, and the fact that we're at best going to have to figure out a way to try somewhere in the neighborhood of about a year's worth of jury trials and whatnot in the span of somewhere between 5 and 6 months whenever we open up again fully. That's caused us to rethink much of the way we do business in the criminal justice system. It's caused us to reevaluate cases and case strengths and what's really worth moving forward on, given the limited resources we have in an already limited, in an environment that's already limited in its resources, but even more so now. But tacked onto that, I think the George Floyd case has been, a seminal moment. And so it's important for this commission, I think, to take it on head on. And so I'll quit making a speech here, but I'll give one final thought. I support the idea of this. And as I told Professor Francis, it seems to me that my one request, though, is, this is a time to think boldly and not just kind of dance around the edges. Talking about police reform is great and certainly a part of the discussion, but sending more cops to de-escalation training and implicit bias training is fine. But if a really nice, polite cop hauls you off to jail, you're still going to jail. And there's a lot more we could be doing within the system to improve people's lives and to limit the number of folks exposed to the criminal justice system and the number of folks we frankly have to deal with in the criminal justice system. So things like community courts, things like deferred adjudication, there's a major discussion now about the role of policing in America. I'm not aware of a cop. I've never met a cop whose favorite part of the job is interacting with mentally ill people. Who doesn't think that's the best part of the job? It's not what cops become cops to do. It's not what they want to do, but it's what they've been left to do. So finding alternative ways for the criminal justice system or for society at large to interact with the mentally ill on calls for that, I think would be important. So that's what I wanted to add. Professor Francis, you're the one that brought this to my attention. Now that I've sort of set the stage for you, what else, what other thoughts do you have on the subject?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This is John Francis from Washburn Law. As Chairman Bennett noted, Professor Phillips and I reached out to Chairman Bennett on Friday. And I think like most people, we've really been moved and reminded by the killing of George Floyd that there is persistent and systemic racial injustice in the criminal justice system. And this, as we all know, it's nothing new. I think a lot of us want to believe that in 2020 we've gotten past it, but the fact is we haven't. And it is long past time to have really difficult conversations, maybe very uncomfortable conversations. And so, like most people, I was thinking, and I'm sure many people on this commission were thinking, this is a criminal justice commission. This should be in our wheelhouse to go ahead and take on the issue of systemic racial injustice in the criminal justice system. As I started thinking about this, though, one of the things that occurred to me, and I've communicated with some other folks, is if we were to create a commission to address racial injustice in the criminal justice system, it probably would have been resourced differently and constituted differently than the people who are on this commission right now. And so I am of two minds here. And one thing that I really, really agree with Chairman Bennett is this is a time for bold steps. We need to not just pick around the edges. We need to go to places that will be uncomfortable. And I think that means bringing in people with backgrounds that can give perspectives that need to be heard in order to address the issue of racial injustice in a meaningful way. And so just to kind of share with you my thought process is, on the one hand, I feel that we need to act. We're in a moment now. I think there's an opportunity to be seized. This is a time to act. And so many times in the past, we've seen that there's been public discussion and there's been move for reform. and then something else kind of pushes that issue off center stage and the moment is lost. And so I don't want to lose the moment. On the other hand, I think we would be doing a great injustice if we tack this on as an add-on to the commission without the proper resources to meaningfully address this issue, without the proper personnel to provide perspectives and insight that we need in order to address this. And so my first thought was that we should urge the legislature in the most strident terms that there needs to be a dedicated commission to address racial injustice in the criminal justice system. The flaw with that idea is that the legislature is not in session right now, and short of it being called back into session, I don't think that's a feasible action, and I'm concerned that we would lose our moment. So another thought, and what I really want to do is open up to brainstorming on what we can do, but two other thoughts to point out. One, which Chairman Bennett mentioned, is create a subcommittee to address this. And if the subcommittee is going to take on this issue in a meaningful way, we need to add people. We need to add people with perspectives beyond the current constitution of this commission right now. And the other thing that I would say, or that I believe, is that maybe this subcommittee would be a bridge to a dedicated commission that would address racial injustice. And one other thought that I want to toss out there is, I don't know what the governor is currently planning. I don't know if the judiciary is planning on anything, but if there are task forces being considered by the judiciary, if there are task forces being considered by the governor, to coordinate with them. I don't think this is the time to be territorial. I think this is a very important moment. And so I really want to toss this out just to brainstorming, but I really want to urge that if we do this, that it not be window dressing, that it be something that is meaningful, not be a tacked on issue. Otherwise, we're going to be back here over and over and over again. And I realize I'm on a soapbox, and I apologize for probably preaching to the choir. But those are my thoughts on this. And I've communicated with some other folks on this too.
Yeah, so Chairman Bennett, I should probably say who I am when I speak. No, I agree with what you're saying in terms of getting this started up. If we wait, say, well, that's a little late in our game to be adding this, let's just let the legislature take this up. Realistically, by the time they would get back into session, vote, stand up a commission, identify the commission members, and then, have their first meeting, it will be the fall of 2021. Think about that's when this commission started, was the fall of last year. So, or late summer, I suppose, maybe August. That strikes me as, again, if not at the very least wasting the moment, and second of all, being kind of tone deaf to the reality. So I agree. I don't want to just make it an afterthought here. If we make it a standalone commission, or subcommittee, and then clearly identify members from the community at large from around the state of Kansas, I think we could at least get a long way down the road. There's a lot of ifs. If this commission, if our current commission is in fact extended another year or two, then we'd have a decision to make, and that would be whether the legislature is going to stand up a standalone racial discrimination or race in the criminal justice system commission. And if so, then this subcommittee might simply migrate over to that. If not, we're at least affording the space for that subcommittee to do its work and be given an equal seat at the table in terms of the opportunity to weigh in a year-end report to the legislature from the Criminal Justice Reform Commission. So I think these are good ideas, and the time to act is now. And the only power we have is that I'm aware of, again, absent the legislature suddenly being called back into session. The only power I'm aware of is for us to identify a subcommittee or approve a subcommittee, figure out who the chair would be, and then from there identify as many ex officio type ad hoc members to add to it from the community around the state, to populate that committee so they can begin this work. What are the thoughts? Anyone else want to weigh in on this?
Mr. Chair?
Is that Senator Haley?
Yes, sir.
Go ahead, please,
Sure.
Senator.
This is David Haley again, represent Wyandotte County in the legislature. It's my 25th year, and I thank certainly Professor Francis and you for seeing that the time is, or certainly now, not to put off until January what is the topic of well, national and international concern. There are racial impact statements that are in many states already. Let me commend to you and to the committee and the ABA, American Bar Association's report regarding racial impact statements that already exist, that should we impanel a subcommittee through the criminal justice, through this task force, through this commission, that there's a lot of data out there. Many states have already implemented some racial impact statements and their effect. I know Representative Finney, who is with us today, has been a champion of some of the issues, that data collection. Certainly I've pushed for data collection, race-specific data collection for traffic stops and detention. And I would certainly be remiss in not saying that there's a lot to work with now, not only through our commission. I certainly am looking at what the Kansas Sentencing Commission can do at this crucial time. So I have never wanted to serve on any subcommittees here. I look at my role on this commission and others where I'm privileged to serve, Mr. Chair, as hoping to carry the legislation that those who are the stakeholders, the professionals, if you will, who've been impaneled to bring me the football, if you will, the measures, the bills that are well considered. However, this is one that does distinctly affect my district. You know, Kansas, let's face it, when we talk about race, we're a small percentage. We're a minority population. And so it's often not as carefully considered. I live in a metropolitan area that includes Missouri. So Kansas City, Missouri, and the policies that they've implemented regarding race and traffic stops and other areas is often in the same, well, media or the same metropolitan area. So I just share this to say that living in the shadow of that and not seeing Kansas respond for a long time when it comes to data collection, when it comes to policing measures that have been put into place, has been of an issue, certainly to this Senator David Haley. And I'm very pleased to hear you as chair, as one of the outstanding district attorneys in one of our largest counties, Chair Bennett, and for the distinguished professor to recognize that we're in a crucial time to look at these long-standing policies or desires to see these impact statements promulgated and supported in this state. Long way of saying, I'd be pleased to serve on that subcommittee should you impanel it, and to meet as often as possible as we could to be a part of it. Thank you, sir.
Very good. Thanks, Senator. Representative Finney, did I hear you a second ago?
Oh, yes, I was just hoping that, well, with the legislature, we're not sure of this panel, of this commission, particularly just in case we end. I was just going to ask you personally, is that something that your office could maybe sustain for us? Some type of organization like that?
Sure. I mean, let's put it this way. If it's just a matter of facilitating a space and time, and whether it's remote or in person, sure. I mean, I'm not sure everyone wants to schlep down to Wichita, but I'm happy to, let's put it this way. If we don't get extended, this is important work, and I won't speak for my association, whether or not they want to make me their representative, but if not, I'd be happy to be a ad hoc member to at least give the perspective of a large urban jurisdiction from the prosecution point of view, if that would be a benefit. But yeah, let's put it this way, Gail, I'm all in. If we can't do it here, I'm a part of whatever we can do.
As far as like your association, would that be something that your association might consider supporting as well?
I'm sure. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Chairman Bennett.
Yes.
Thank you, sir. Hello, everybody. Adrian Robertson, pastor at church here in Wyandotte County. And then I just want to say thank you for you and Mr. Francis for recognizing the need for the subcommittee. But I want to speak from the perspective of someone who doesn't have all the knowledge that you all guys have. I think I told you that the first day I was there. I wasn't really sure. When we first met, I wasn't really sure what my purpose was, but I think I'm starting to see now. But from a community perspective, what I would want everybody to know is there's not trust with the system. So what do I mean by that? I think it's great that we want to do this. We want to get this subcommittee going. But, you know, we saw Rodney and nothing happened. You know, Mr. Kaepernick tried to put the message out there and it got twisted. And then it took Mr. Floyd's murder to literally cause 50 states to protest. Never seen ever in the world, let alone the protests that are going on around the world. And so I'm saying this to say to this committee that when we're talking about bringing people on, if you're talking about bringing people from the African-American Black community, there's going to be some hesitancy just with trust in believing that a statewide or a state-sanctioned type of committee is really interested in putting teeth into some type of legislation that really focuses on this. So because I'm just in the meetings I've sat in here, I could tell by the heart of the people that are here that there's a lot of good dynamic work going on. And I just wanted to put that out there, is that if it seems hard at first trying to put this committee together with people who look like me from the community level, that it should be expected. And so we will do our best to, especially when we're talking about getting young adults engaged. That's my thing. We really have to get more young adult voices. I don't like to use the phrase millennials, but we need to get young adult voices engaged who can help carry the baton. And so I'm willing to do that work. But I'm also saying this thing is going to have some teeth to it. It's going to have some support from people who don't look like us to say, we got this. We really support what this thing is about. So I just wanted to put that out there with all the conversations that are going on. But I thank you, Chairman Bennett. I thank you, Mr. Francis, for that. Thank you for everyone that's putting in the work. But I just want to put that out there so you would know. So thank you.
I appreciate your comments. And I do think, too, there's one other perspective. We kind of reiterated it throughout the life of this commission, but we also need to make sure we take into account the experience of folks in the rural areas. There's, yes, as Senator Haley said, the African-American population in the state's fairly small compared to, maybe New York and others. But the other point is not all African-Americans live in the cities. I mean, there are communities of color in some of the more rural areas, and they face, I'm guessing, a little nuanced, different set of circumstances and situation than someone might in Wyandotte County, where you and Senator Haley are at, or here in Wichita. So I'd add to that I'd add to your comments not only that we need not just senators and reps and DAs, but we need younger people and people from the communities. But I'd also make it clear we need people from a full spectrum of the state. So anyone else have any comments?
Mr. Chairman, I do. One thing is, I can wholly respect Mr. Roberson's about worrying about if things are going to happen. That's why I think it's very important also on the law enforcement side where I sit on. It's kind of the same thing he says, every time we put out a new commission or something from the state, we just want to make sure that there is voice, not only from the large agencies, because a lot of times you only hear on commissions from the large agencies when they say they represent the state, but in reality, like Sheriff Carr's agency is larger than mine even, but his and my agencies are probably more, there's more of us than there are, say, the Sedgwick County Sheriff's Department or Johnson County Sheriff's Department. No, they need to be represented, but so do the smaller agencies do as well. I have a town of 3,200 is all that I live in, and we do have multicultural here, believe it or not, and not just African-American, but multiple different ones. And we have a different perspective compared to like what happened, down in Sedgwick County last weekend. But I think it's very important to have not only LEOs on there, but a variety of different views from law enforcement on there as well. and there's no reason they cannot work together. You know, I stood in a rally Saturday. I wholeheartedly believe in this to fix something, but I think Mr. Roberson's right. It's got to be fixed in the right way, and I think we can do that. I don't know if you have anything, Mr. Carr, on that or not.
Mr. Chairman, Sheriff Carr, I'm in agreement with everybody here. I just think to move forward on this, I think we need to clarify for those in attendance who are listening in and aren't aware on the creation of the subcommittee. I think we need to go on record from way I'm reading the KSA Chapter 62 and the formation of the commission, the duties, the members, the appointments, and so on. I'm reading Section B9, the studies to study other matters that, as the commission determines, are appropriate and necessary to complete a thorough review of the criminal justice system. I believe, I don't know if anybody else in the commission is seeing anything different, but that would be the platform that we use for the standing up of another subcommittee.
Perfect. I think it absolutely fits. Okay.
Chairman Bennett, I'm sorry, this is Jean Phillips. So when Professor Francis reached out to me about this issue last week, I've been rolling this around a lot in my head. And as the conversation has been going back and forth between John and I do think that now is the time to do something. I also feel in some way like we're going to get sort of one shot at this. And so we need to do it right. And I just want to make sure that we pull together the resources to be able to do a really thorough, comprehensive, bold, have those uncomfortable conversations. I really wouldn't, I don't quite know how to pull all of those resources together, but I think it's really important that we do that and that we not just sort of tack this on. And I just want to reiterate, we need to do this now, but we need to not, we just need to make sure we do it correctly.
Fair enough. I think that's going to be determined by the people who are a part of the subcommittee and the seriousness with which they take the task. I think the only way to know what kind of resources we need is for the subcommittee to be stood up, identify members, have your first meeting, and after that first meeting, come back to the commission and say, okay, here's what we've identified as step one, phase one. Do we need more people? Do we need studies? Do we need access to information? Et cetera. I will add that I'm sure there are any number of task forces or Pew and other research type organizations who could bring to bear their research and information and ideas, if nothing else, for informative sessions for the subcommittee to help frame their arguments and their directions. So to the extent that I, as the chair, have any weight to throw around in terms of sending letters and requests and whatnot, and getting the governor engaged, Supreme Court engaged, I'm happy to do that to make sure we do, as you've said, take the most opportunity, or make the most of the opportunity that's in front of us.
So
go ahead.
This is Jean Phillips again. As a procedural matter, do we need to have a motion for a subcommittee?
Yep, you and I must be tracking each other's thoughts today. That was my next thing I was going to say. Is I think unless there's further discussion, and I don't hear any dispute about the plan moving forward, there's obviously some trepidation, but some concern about the manner in which. But again, I think we can overcome that. If there's nothing else to be said, then I will take a motion to impanel to stand up a subcommittee, distinct subcommittee on let's just say race in the criminal justice system. Keep it as expansive as possible, and then let the subcommittee, through its various working groups, hone in on more details. But do I have a motion to stand up a subcommittee on race in the criminal justice system?
So moved.
So moved.
Second. So moved.
Okay, I've got Chief Ackerman moving. I think I've recognized Senator Haley's voice as a second. And to keep in keeping with the way we're doing things on this Zoom meeting, I'll go ahead and do a roll call. So be prepared if I think you kind of get the order of things here. I'll go ahead and start with myself, Mark Bennett, chairperson. I approve. Representative Steve Owens.
Yeah, Stephen Owens, 74th House District. Yes, absolutely, I approve. And if I might add briefly, I didn't have the opportunity to chime into this. I definitely want to be part of this committee. I expressed to those that we were speaking with, John Francis and yourself, that I'm not in a place to chair it, but I definitely want to be on it because I think I stand to learn as much as anybody else about this topic. I agree that we have to have uncomfortable conversations. But those uncomfortable conversations have to happen in such a manner that people are comfortable enough to express their feelings, what they see, and how they feel without being labeled. Because I think part of the challenge with these quote unquote uncomfortable conversations is that if you take a white man or a white woman and they express some of their feelings and their inherent biases, possibly growing up or whatever, all of a sudden these public meetings can label people as being racist or as being biased, which then, right, prohibits the open conversations that truly need to have. So I think while we need to have those, we've got to figure out a mechanism by which that this committee can truly, people feel comfortable having those challenging conversations without anybody placing labels or anything like that. So, but I fully support the intent and look forward to working with members of the committee and say aye.
Very good. I believe Senator Wilburn's absent today. Chief Ackerman.
Aye.
Judge Brown.
Aye.
Sheriff Carr. Is that an aye?
Yes.
Sure. Okay. Professor Francis.
Aye.
Vince Cohen.
Aye.
Tabitha Owen. Still there, Tabitha?
Yes, that's a yes for me. Can you hear me?
Yep. Very good. Thank you. Sylvia Penner.
Aye.
Bill Persinger. I know Bill's having a little trouble with his mute button, he said earlier. Bill, you there? I heard something. Well, Bill, we'll get back to you in a second. Professor Phillips.
Aye.
Pastor Roberson. There's a little mute button at the bottom left, Professor. Or, excuse me. Was that a yes? Pastor Roberson.
He is shaking his head yes, and he gave you the thumbs up yes.
Yeah, I heard him say yes, and he gave a thumbs up.
Yes. Well, through head shaking, thumbs up, and someone else hearing it, I'll acknowledge the yes from Pastor Roberson. Shelley Williams.
Yes, aye.
Let's see, next voting member, Senator Haley.
Aye.
Representative Finney.
Aye.
I think that's it for the voting members. I'll go back one last time. Bill Persinger, did you get your mute button off or on or whatever it would be? Well, we'll just show Bill as unable to vote. So we have a unanimous passage of this subcommittee. So to keep the things moving here, what I'm going to suggest is everybody who is interested in being a part of this, let me know, and I will get with Jordan and we'll set up a Zoom meeting for the subcommittee within the next 30 days. I also think we need to start identifying ex officio type ad hoc members, because I agree, you know, I just don't think that we have a diverse enough group on this commission to address this with the clarity and giving it the authority and the credibility that it needs, just to address what Pastor Roberson said a moment ago. And it's one thing for us to all come up with a bunch of grand ideas, but if there's no buy-in from the community because none of they don't feel like their voices are being heard on this, you know, even if the ideas are sound, it's not going to be endorsed or address the issues. So the next thing is going to be identifying people who might be appropriate. I do think that this is one subcommittee that I could see lots of working groups, lots of discrete working groups working on various issues. So I'll open up for discussion here. What I'm going to suggest is I will call the first meeting. It's, as the chair of the commission, I kind of feel some responsibility to make sure this gets off on the right foot, rather than one of us being, who do we want to be the chair? And I ask for a vote now, and we name somebody. I'm going to defer on that, because I think what Pastor Roberson said is appropriate. I think for this group to be have even more credibility, it might be that the chair of the subcommittee might be somebody that's not actually on the commission. And if there's some rule barring that, then they could at least be the acting chair, and one of us could be the chair in name only. But need to turn over the some of the discussion, at least, and how the direction this goes to whoever the members think is the right person to chair it. So I'll call the first meeting, at which time I would expect the members of the subcommittee to identify somebody, then to chair it moving forward. So my volunteering is not to be read anything more than just helping this get off the ground. So further discussion on, do we need at this time, do people think we need to start naming names and brainstorming here on the record as far as who we want? Or maybe one question we should ask is, how many folks do we want on this committee? Because or the subcommittee, this is something I think everyone wants to be a part of, if nothing else. So we aren't seen as not being a part of it, but at the same time, 30 or 40 people ending up on a subcommittee is going to get unmanageable. So any thoughts that anyone might have in terms of the size and how many folks we need to extend an offer to?
Chairman, this is Tabitha Owens, Smith County Attorney. I would just say that first, I would be glad to be on this subcommittee. It may be that I'll end up learning more than I'm actually giving, but I'm good with that. And I think that you talk a lot about the difference in perspective from urban counties versus rural counties and communities. And I know that Chief Ackerman talked about it as well. So being from a rural community, we don't have the opportunity to get into these conversations as often as people in larger areas, simply because we don't have, and for example, in my county, the census data shows that there are no Black or African-American families. And so we don't get to have those conversations, but we're still raising kids and sending them to college and sending them out into the world. And it's important that we're educating them appropriately. So I would be glad to be on the committee. And I do think that maybe we should talk about it now as far as getting started, at least to some degree, so that we're not running into coma and Cora issues where we're discussing it via email and people are emailing and saying, oh, I'll do it or I won't, or it's easier to do it while we're in an open meeting and not have to schedule another open meeting to discuss another meeting.
Meetings to discuss meetings. Yeah. Okay.
Right. Yeah.
Mr. Chairman, Judge Brown.
Yes, sir.
I would suggest you get volunteers from this committee, and unfortunately it sound ironic because you just said not more meetings, but get some volunteers together and decide what work groups may be important to study the variety of issues, and then designate each member of this committee to solicit names of prospective members of the work groups. Reach out to them, and I don't see any other way that you can do it. You got to start, and because it's too big an issue to have one, as we've discovered with this committee, to have just one group deal with it. So that would be my suggestion.
That's great advice. So the idea would be, we'll take a list of, I guess the first order of business is maybe identify the working groups, at least preliminarily. The subcommittee might get together and recognize that we've completely, blown past 2 or 3 working groups that need to be added. But at least preliminarily, let's identify the working groups, and then let's take some volunteers, at least from people who want to be a part of the subcommittee, want to be a part specifically of that working group that's been identified, to go out and solicit members, 4, 5, 10 per working group. So in that fashion, we might actually have 40 people involved in the subcommittee, but more so in terms of working together on a working group. What you had in mind, Judge?
You've already got a county attorney in Tabitha Owen. You have a representative in Stephen Owens that have expressed interest in being on the committee. You have others, I think, that may want to volunteer from this group. And then that, from the Criminal Justice Reform Commission, they then would determine what work groups may need to be formed, which one of the members of the Criminal Justice Reform Commission will solicit ad hoc members to participate in the work groups, and then proceed accordingly.
I've got Tabitha Owens, Representative Steve Owens, Professor Phillips, Professor Francis. I didn't hear specific, but I assume you want to be a part of this as well?
Yes.
Chair, Mr. Chair, I'd love to be a part of that as well.
Senator Haley?
Pastor Roberts.
Excuse me. I was writing Senator Haley's name down because I know he'd said so. Pastor Roberson.
This Chief Ackerman, I emailed you already as well.
Okay. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. That's 7. Oh, and Representative Finney, I think, said so as well. That's 8 from this commission who are willing to be a part of this. And I think then the suggestion then is you all, maybe at our first meeting, again, I'm sorry it's 3 o'clock in the afternoon, so I should be still fairly fresh, Judge, but suggesting then that these folks then go out and solicit people to be a part of their various working groups, or are you suggesting that we identify working groups now, or let this group get together in a separate date to identify what types of subject matters would be appropriate for those working groups? I'm sorry.
I love to volunteer people for more meetings. So my suggestion would be that the volunteers today meet separately, think about what work groups should be formed to deal with the various issues. Because as Professor Francis pointed out, and Professor Phillips, this is a very broad topic, and break it out, think about it, break out into what work groups, and then in another meeting that you would conduct, have each of the individuals volunteer to then start soliciting names for each of the work groups.
Gotcha. All right, makes sense. Anyone disagree with that path moving forward?
This Chief Ackerman, I just have one other question. I'm on the Chiefs of Police Board of Directors. I think we should have like both sides. Like I think the Sheriff's Association ought to have somebody either like Sandy Horton, who's the director, or even if Bill Carr wanted to sit on it. But I think to have different perspectives, I think that would help as well.
I heard another voice.
Yeah, Chairman Bennett, this is Jean Phillips. I'm going to echo what was just said. I think that rather than trying to do working groups today, we need to be very thoughtful about this, and we need to pause, pull this group together, really think about, and have an opportunity to really think deeply about the kinds of groups that we need and the issues that we need to explore, rather than just sort of throwing stuff off the cuff today. I think we need an opportunity to reflect.
Makes sense. Well, why don't I'll get with Jordan. I'll set up. So what I'm thinking here is I'll amend what I said earlier. I may call the first 2 meetings. The first one just to get the working groups, or get all the volunteers together. We'll do it in an open meeting. Adequate notice, so anyone who wants to weigh in or listen can. See how far that takes us, and then I'm willing to call the next 1 or 2 meetings until the membership is more clearly identified of the subcommittee. The working groups are more clearly identified, and then at that point, a chair can be selected to move forward with that subcommittee with respective chairs of each working group to do the hard work. As we've seen, the working groups and the subcommittees is where all the work's getting done in this commission even. So I expect the same from that subcommittee. So it seems like that strikes me as sage advice. Judge Brown, Professor Phillips, anyone else want to weigh in? Does this sound like a plan for everybody?
Mr. Chairman, this is Spence Cohen.
Yes, sir.
I know it sounds like we've got a good group going, and I thank everybody for doing this. I would just throw out there, I think it would, I know we're not discussing work groups right now. I think it would be a smart thing to have at least, I'm going to throw this out anyway, a supervision work group as far as supervisors, court services, community corrections, parole. I think it's pretty vital that, that might be a work group that we can discuss those issues as well, because I know I've seen that through my years of experience as a supervisor. And I would be willing to be at least on a work group in relation to supervision if that's what is deemed necessary and a component of all this. So I just wanted to throw that out there.
No, I think it's great. I mean, if nothing else, people have questions. I want to change this, or this. Your expertise may be, well, you need to look at this law. Here's the thing you don't know. I mean, if nothing else, we're all put on this commission in the first place because of our years of experience and some degree of expertise. Whether we're the ones, I'm not suggesting that we're all going to guide the work of the subcommittee. Another, middle-aged white guy from Wichita is probably not the one who needs to be running the race in the criminal justice system subcommittee, but I could at least weigh in and give people an idea of how things work and where they might want to look in terms of the tweaks they want to make. So I think the perspective of a lot of the members of this commission would be impactful, at least in helping share where ideas might come from. So, yep, agreed.
Chairman Bennett, can I ask a question based real quick, because I know we're at 3:30. I love what Professor Phillips said about really thinking this thing through, because I know off the top of my mind, I've got about 4 to 6 individuals that are, what most of us here consider up and coming leaders here in Wyandotte County. And so, especially in the Black community. So might an idea be that we have a framework for what this committee would be about, and then talk to those people that we may be thinking about coming on as ad hoc and saying, what would be some committees that you think might really help this plan go forward? And so that in that way, we're hearing from the quote unquote stakeholders that are impacted from that. That's why I really like that idea with Professor Phillips. So I just wanted to throw that out there as an idea as well.
I think that's appropriate, rather than, I think her idea of let's all of us take a breath here. I mean, she and Professor Francis and I had just kicked this around. I included Representative Owens in the conversation briefly Friday night, but I've had the grand total of 48, 96 hours or 72 hours to think about this myself. And before we want to be seen as being proactive and making the right steps. I don't want to take the first misstep though. So let's get the subcommittee has been approved. Judge Brown's suggestion that we take volunteers now to meet again as a subcommittee, brainstorm some of the ideas, with the caveat that we're going to be identifying members from the larger Kansas community, from rural, urban, etc. And that's the time we'll start talking about working groups, and it may take yet another meeting to firm it up even more. But at some point this summer, the idea would be to have a identifiable working groups with identifiable members to begin this work. Does that address your question, Pastor?
Yes, sir. Most definitely. Yes, sir.
Very good. All right. Well, kind of blew right through the break, but this was a robust conversation. I'm glad we had it. And frankly, it's a terrible situation in Minneapolis. It's a terrible situation. We've been on the heels of many terrible situations. And if this tragedy was going to happen, I guess the only upside, I hate to use that word upside, but if it was going to happen, I'm glad it happened when we were in a position as a commission to take stock of it and try to make some good come out of this terrible situation in our state, so that we can truly improve the criminal justice system with our reform efforts, not just dance around the edges. So I appreciate everyone's willingness to be a part of this. Appreciate all the volunteers. I will reach out with Jordan, and I think maybe we set a meeting in the next 2 to 3 weeks. We don't have to wait a month. sooner we get on this, sooner we start having these meetings to help solidify, the sooner I can step back and let this subcommittee do its work. So we've already got the next discussion, or already had the discussion regarding the next meeting date. Is there anything else anyone wanted to bring to the attention of the commission before we adjourn? Okay. I'm not sure what the appropriate amount of time to wait on a Zoom meeting is, but I thought 20 seconds is probably sufficient. So again, thank you everyone for their time this afternoon. It's now 3:35. So I'm looking forward to where we're headed. I think there's a lot of potential here, both in terms of the commission, but I think this subcommittee and the discussion there will make our work that much more meaningful and impactful. And sorry about that, but I think that'll make our work here that much more impactful. So if there's nothing else,
I just got one thing, Mr. Chairman. This is Todd Ackerman. Can Jordan, could you email out that reading that we had in the beginning? Since I have a thing tomorrow morning, I'll make sure I get that right.
In fact, Jordan, why don't you just go ahead and or you and Natalie mail it out to all the subcommittee chairs.
Thank you.
With that, I think we've done all the good we can do for one day. So thank you all very much for your time and attention, and we'll be in touch. If I'll speak to some of you fairly soon on the new subcommittee, and others we'll see you on July 13th.
Chairman Bennett,
Yes,
do you need a motion to adjourn?
I bet I do.
I move.
Second.
That was
Dean Phillips, I'm sorry.
all right. Trustee Phillips, I think it was Tabitha on the second. Is that correct?
Correct.
All right. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Do we really need a roll call on that, Jordan?
No.
All right. I'll take that as an affirmative. So, all right. Very good. Everybody have a good afternoon. Take care.
Thank you.